Hello everybody, my name is Ben Kramer, and today we're talking user interfaces. That's right, UI, the first thing your player likely interacts with and something that can really leave a lasting impression. A good UI is often a thankless job because if it's done well, the user shouldn't have much to say about it because it just works. When it's bad, yeah, you're gonna hear about it. And I'm sick of hearing about it, so it's time my bare minimum UI got an overhaul. So first off, a little rundown of my UI philosophy and why it is where it is. When it comes to your UI, I say start it early, but finish it late. That's because your UI can be a super valuable tool for testing out your gameplay systems. Let's say you have a health system. It'd be super useful to have a simple UI element that can display how much health you have before and after taking hits. However, you don't want to finish it right from the get-go. This was something I had to learn early on. If you make your UI systems too complicated right from the get-go, later, if you have things to change, it's going to be a lot harder to untangle that mess. Let's say you have a gameplay system that goes obsolete and you have a really fancy UI element to go with it. Well, now you've wasted time making that element super fancy when it's just going to go in the garbage. So keeping your UI simple allows for quick pivots. But at this point, Liquid Space is making good progress, and this UI simply won't do. It needs to be more functional, it needs to do more, and it needs to look nice. So the first thing to tackle was functionality. My game is very gamepad reliant. However, I put off adding gamepad compatibility because I wanted to focus more on the essential systems first. Now let me tell you, putting gamepad highly recommended at the top of your game and then not having controller supported menus, it's a bad look. So it had to change. And thanks to this dev enabled tutorial, I finally had controller supported menus and it is so nice. No more having to reach for my mouse just to go to the main menu from the pause screen. I can do it all right on the gamepad. Next, it was time to make this UI do more. So for anyone who has ever tested my game, I present to you volume controls. Now, why is this such a big deal? You see, when you finally share your game, you're nervous, you're excited, you're dreaming about how the play tester is going to declare you the next Shigeru Miyamoto. But then the first thing you hear is,
how do I turn this down?
Yes, scary surprises aren't limited to Dragon Ball FighterZ opening screens or Fallen Order boot-ups. Game audio balance is just not your first thought, so you just gotta forget about it until people get mad at you about it. Maybe it's the mark of a true developer to make sure the player's ears are destroyed on boot. Whatever the case, I added controllers for master volume, music, and effects, and mapped my sounds to one of those three categories. Started out ugly. We'll get to that. Now, before moving on to the look and feel, I had to make one more small adjustment. You see, one tester from my local game dev group had a pretty unique display. It made it obvious some UI elements were not anchored, so I quickly patched that up to make sure displays could handle my UI. Go ahead, throw any resolution at it. No problem. We're gonna disregard that one. But with that out of the way, it was time to get to the style. So our story of style starts with a new feature. I needed a way to introduce the story. You see, now that I've made cutscenes, I needed a way to actually introduce players to the story. As an indie developer, making super high fidelity CGI cutscenes just isn't a viable option. So I thought these story cards would be a nice, feasible way to introduce the story for a new level, add some context, that sort of thing. But as I was drafting, it looked good enough, but it needed to look cooler. And what's cool? Spaceships are cool. So I rendered my ship model into a 2D UI element I could use in Unreal. Now that I had them, I placed them on either side of the text. Neat. This element ended up being very versatile, and I actually added it as a way to show which button was currently selected on the main menu. Now it's time to take a sledgehammer to these volume controls. See, sliders were cool, but they were really cumbersome, especially to program with. So I started from scratch. I made a sub-widget that takes a value and changes that value with clicks or presses on the left and right arrows. This made making the volume control widget itself super easy, because really all I had to do was stack 3 of these elements on top of each other, and then bind them to whichever aspect of the volume they control. For the buttons, I again thought spaceships, and I took the silhouette of one of the frames of my animation, I shrank it, and made it look more like an arrow. Now it's time to start making this main menu look much better. At first, I tried using the same style I use for my dialogue widgets. I thought this would help give some cohesiveness between all the different UI elements. It looked okay, but was really weak at defining the area that it occupied, and it didn't really look like a button, so kind of failed. I tried to remedy it by just adding some color combinations, but it really didn't work. Finally, I tried this, and let me tell you, if I was making a 2011 Flash game, this would be the jackpot right here. But it wasn't, so I started over. So I took my arrows and just put them in a box. Colleges, I will be taking your honorary design degrees anytime. To complete it, I added a color scheme that denotes what's a level or what's sort of getting into the game and what's more of a menu or just settings. Basically, cyan represents getting into the game. The more neutral white represents getting out of the game, changing the settings, going to the main menu, things like that. Finally, when you do select a level, the ship flies off and a fade out transitions you to the level. So with all these changes, the text was starting to look really bland and really generic. So I went looking for some free fonts, landed on Viga, and I'm really happy with it. I think it adds a lot of character, isn't too much, isn't wingdings, but it does help define the game and makes it more exciting than just regular old out-of-the-box text. But that wasn't enough, because the text actually started to blend in with some of the backgrounds, especially when I was in the game. So I added a simple drop shadow, and that actually really helped. It really helped separate it from the background, almost gave it a pseudo 3D effect. Now finally, we had the title text. This one was going to be a doozy. In all seriousness, I like the subtle edge that this orange drop shadow adds. And with all these changes in combination, I actually think the game's starting to really get a personality outside of the game itself. The menus are starting to reflect that this isn't just some Unreal stock project. Last but not least, I gave everything a UI sound effect. There's not a lot to talk about here. I already had some sound effects downloaded that worked out really well, but it makes a huge difference. Just interacting with the buttons, the menus themselves, the pause screen, it just all feels so much better when you add a sound effect behind it. But that is everything. Hope you enjoyed hearing about my process, about how I made my UI better, and I hope you're interested in the project and following along more. I know my HUD could still use a lot of overhauling, and I still have the boss health bar that definitely needs some work, so all those and more will be coming in the next devlogs. My name is Ben Kramer. Thanks for watching.